When a liberal host mocked Denzel Washington's necklace on live TV, she didn't realize she was handing him the moment of the year. His response silenced the room and lit up the internet. The cameras were rolling. The stage glowed under a halo of immaculate studio lighting. A modern set, all sleek glass panels and brushed steel framed by towering LED screens that pulsed with the logo, The Jessica Martin Show. This wasn't just another talk show, it was the talk show. Ratings juggernaut, Twitter trending powerhouse, the kind of platform that turned interviews into national debates before the credits even rolled. Jessica Martin, 37, sharp as a scalpel and twice as quick, sat perched in her signature white armchair, legs crossed, cards in hand. She was everything modern media loved, media-trained, polished, provocative. A liberal firebrand with a talent for asking the questions nobody else would, or maybe the ones everyone else was too afraid to. Over the years, she'd gone viral more times than most shows get viewers. She'd cornered senators, flustered CEOs, embarrassed best-selling authors, always with that same disarming smile and rapid-fire delivery. Clips of her fact-checking in real time and calling out outdated thinking racked up millions of views. And tonight, she was aiming even higher. Her producers were buzzing backstage. The phones were already warming up. This wasn't just another guest. Tonight, they had Denzel Washington, Hollywood royalty, two-time Oscar winner, the embodiment of classic American poise and dignity. He rarely did interviews these days, not the performative kind, not the gotcha trap kind. But something had brought him here, a new film, sure, but also something deeper, a conversation about legacy, culture, maybe even masculinity in a changing world. Jessica was ready. She'd done her homework. She knew Denzel was private, grounded in faith, unapologetically old school. It made him a perfect target for the kind of polite confrontation she'd mastered. This wasn't about hating him, it was about challenging him, about showing that even legends weren't immune to the tide of modern progress. She glanced at the monitor. The audience was full, buzzing with anticipation. They weren't just fans, they were witnesses, phones poised to catch whatever fireworks might unfold. The stage manager gave the countdown. 3, 2, 1, applause. Jessica smiled into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a true icon, Denzel Washington. And just like that, the moment began. The applause hit like a wave, loud, rising, rolling across the studio with genuine awe. Denzel Washington stepped onto the stage, shoulders squared, stride unhurried. There was no flash, no attempt to steal the spotlight. He didn't need to. He was the spotlight. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and crisp black shirt, he looked like what he was, timeless. No gimmicks, no pretense, just presence. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice to command the room. But it wasn't the suit that drew the most attention. It was the necklace. A thin gold chain resting just above his sternum, glinting under the studio lights. And on it, a small cross. Simple, unapologetic. A quiet statement in a room built for loud opinions. The camera cut to Jessica Martin. She clapped politely, her smile flawless. But for a brief second, just a flicker, her eyes locked on the necklace. A tiny shift in her expression, not surprise, not offense. Just recognition. She'd seen it. So had the producers. So did viewers at home. It wasn't lost on anyone. The cross wasn't controversial on its own. But on this show, in this cultural moment, it meant something. It whispered of faith, tradition, maybe even resistance. It clashed with the curated neutrality of most celebrity appearances, the kind that said nothing and meant even less. Denzel approached, shook Jessica's hand. Firm, respectful. "Thank you for having me," he said, voice smooth, deep, anchored and calm. Jessica gestured to the chair opposite her. "The honor is all ours." They sat, the applause faded. For a moment, silence settled over the room. Not awkward, charged. Like everyone was holding their breath. Jessica shuffled her cue cards. Her smile sharpened just slightly. She was warming up. The opening questions would be easy: film, family, legacy. But the necklace had already changed the tone. And Denzel? He didn't adjust it, didn't hide it, didn't acknowledge it at all. Because he didn't have to. It was there. That was enough. And the real conversation hadn't even started yet. The interview began like so many others, smooth, well-rehearsed, familiar. Jessica Martin leaned in slightly, that signature posture of engaged curiosity. The studio lights softened. The camera framed her and Denzel in perfect symmetry. On the surface, it was a casual conversation between a respected journalist and a legendary actor. "So, Denzel," she began, her tone light, inviting, "your new film, Crossroads, it's already generating Oscar buzz. What drew you to the role?" Denzel smiled, that same grounded, humble expression he'd worn for decades. "The story," he said simply. "It's about redemption, about second chances. That's the kind of story we don't tell enough anymore." The audience nodded along. Jessica laughed lightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've been doing this for what, 4 decades now? You've played cops, soldiers, lawyers, even Shakespeare. Is there anything left on the bucket list?" Denzel shrugged, still smiling. "I don't know if there's a list. I just try to find work that speaks to the human condition. Something with meaning. Doesn't have to be loud, just true." It was classic Denzel, measured, thoughtful, not chasing applause, but earning it anyway. His voice wasn't just calm, it was calming. The audience relaxed into him. Jessica nodded, playing along, her laugh just a beat behind his every response. "You've had such a long, consistent career. Rare in this industry. What's your secret?" He leaned back slightly. "Discipline, focus, God's grace, and staying grounded." That last part, God's grace, hung in the air just a second longer than the rest. Jessica didn't miss it. Her smile stayed, but her eyes flickered, just slightly. The shift began there, subtle. A half-second delay in her response, a small edge entering her voice, tucked beneath polished professionalism. She turned to the audience. "You know, when we were prepping for this interview, we were looking at your career highlights, and it's hard to even narrow them down." The compliment landed, but there was something behind it, a setup, a quiet circling of the target. Denzel nodded appreciatively, none the wiser, or maybe choosing not to react. Either way, the mood was steady, for now. But behind the perfect lighting and polite smiles, the tone was beginning to tilt. Something was coming, and Jessica knew exactly when to strike. Jessica shifted in her seat. The smile remained, but her tone turned just a little more playful, teasing, maybe even patronizing, to the trained ear. She crossed one leg over the other, held up her cue cards like she was flipping casually through notes, then looked up, directly at Denzel, directly at the necklace. "That's an interesting accessory, Denzel," she said with a smirk, voice smooth like honey, laced with lemon. "A little throwback, don't you think?" She let the words linger, like a challenge dressed as banter. A few awkward laughs bubbled up from the audience. Some of them didn't know whether to laugh or hold back. Others did what audiences often do. They followed the host's lead, smirking, snickering, leaning into the energy Jessica was carefully cultivating. Denzel didn't flinch. He offered a small, knowing smile, not defensive, not amused, just steady. The kind of look that said, "I've been here before." He didn't reach for the necklace, didn't explain it, just let the moment pass like a breeze that didn't touch him. Jessica pressed her advantage. "I mean, we're living in a pretty modern world, right? Crosses, symbols like that, they tend to come with, let's just say, loaded messages." The air shifted again, this time tighter, sharper, less playful. She chuckled lightly, trying to keep it friendly, but everyone in the room knew what was happening. The producers leaned forward in the control room. Camera operators tightened their frames. Social media interns started clipping the moment in real time, eyes gleaming at the potential virality. Jessica leaned in again, her smile unchanged, but her intent crystal clear. "And here you are," she added, "with a little piece of the past hanging around your neck." It was subtle, but deliberate. This wasn't just small talk anymore. This was the first real shot. And Denzel? He didn't blink, didn't lean back, didn't shift his posture. He just looked at her, calm, composed, and utterly unbothered. The necklace glinted beneath the lights, and still, he said nothing. Because sometimes silence hits harder than words, and Denzel Washington knew exactly how to make it speak. Jessica Martin leaned in just a little further now, that polished posture of hers giving way to something more assertive, intentional. She had moved past the bait and was now tightening the line. Her smile didn't fade, but the air in the studio shifted noticeably. "With everything going on in the world," she said, voice sweet but sharpened at the edges, "do you really think it's responsible for someone with your platform to wear a religious symbol like that?" She gestured lightly toward Denzel's necklace, the gold cross still resting quietly against his chest, like it had nothing to prove. Jessica's tone wasn't overtly hostile, but it didn't need to be. It carried a note of suggestion, a loaded implication. That's not really acceptable anymore. "Isn't it," she paused, letting her words curl in the silence, "a bit alienating?" The last word hung in the air like smoke, and with it, the trap was set. The audience murmured. It wasn't laughter this time, it was confusion, tension. A few heads turned, eyes darted from Jessica to Denzel. The applause signs weren't lit. Nobody was quite sure how to respond. The moment had cracked open something deeper. The necklace wasn't just a necklace anymore. It had become a symbol in a different kind of battle, one between tradition and progress, faith and optics, conviction and political correctness. Jessica wasn't just questioning jewelry. She was questioning whether quiet, personal belief still had a place in the public square. Behind the glass, producers perked up. They knew this was it. The kind of viral pivot that could own headlines for a week. This was the moment their algorithms lived for. Jessica kept her voice even, measured, like she was asking about the weather. But behind her eyes was a flicker of anticipation. She'd seen guests stumble here before. This was the move that usually worked. Create just enough discomfort, imply just enough social shame, and even the most seasoned personalities would backpedal, reframe, or soften their stance. And here sat Denzel Washington, Hollywood legend, cultural titan, with a symbol that wasn't trendy or progressive, but personal, maybe even controversial. All she needed was one twitch, one awkward laugh, one defensive shift, just one crack. But Denzel didn't move, not yet. And that's when Jessica started to believe she was winning. Silence. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy, deliberate kind. The kind that makes people squirm in their seats without knowing why. Denzel Washington didn't answer. He didn't break eye contact, didn't glance at the necklace, didn't smile, frown, or sigh. He just sat there, still and focused, letting the weight of Jessica's question settle into the room like dust. Across from him, Jessica Martin maintained her composure. On the outside, she smiled, eyebrows arched ever so slightly, as if she'd made her point and was now just waiting for the inevitable backpedal. This was usually where the guest offered a safe answer. Something sanitized, something that wouldn't offend, wouldn't trend the wrong way. But Denzel gave her nothing. And in giving her nothing, he gave the moment power. The audience sensed it. Phones were already recording. A few people exchanged glances. Even the sound tech in the back held his breath. Jessica's smile twitched. Barely noticeable, but there. She shifted her cue cards casually, like the question had been just another bump in the road. But it wasn't. She knew that. Everyone knew that. The necklace gleamed again, catching the overhead lighting, as if it were answering the question itself. Jessica leaned back, pretending to relax, though her fingers subtly tightened on the armrest. She thought she was gaining control. She thought the silence meant hesitation. But Denzel wasn't hesitating. He was waiting. And that, more than anything, was unsettling. Because silence in today's world is rare, most people rush to explain, to defend, to placate. But not him, not here. Denzel let it breathe, let her words linger, let the room marinate in discomfort. And the longer he waited, the more the energy in the studio shifted, not toward Jessica, but toward him. Because silence, when used right, doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like certainty. And Denzel Washington wasn't backing down. He was preparing. And the response that would come next? It wouldn't just change the room, it would change the entire conversation. And then finally, Denzel spoke. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't performative. It didn't need to be. "It's not a fashion choice," he said simply. The room stilled. His tone was calm, but there was weight behind every word, like steel wrapped in velvet. "It's faith," he continued, "and I don't check my convictions at the studio door." That was it. No monologue, no defense, no apology. "Just truth," said plainly. A few soft gasps rolled through the audience, followed by scattered murmurs. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't discomfort. It was something closer to respect. Because Denzel didn't come to perform, he came to stand. Jessica Martin's smile didn't falter, but her body language betrayed her. A slight shift in her seat, a firmer grip on her cards. The moment hadn't gone the way she planned. She'd expected either resistance or retreat. Instead, she got certainty. Denzel wasn't angry. He wasn't defiant in the way headlines like to frame men like him. He was grounded, like a man who had nothing to prove, but wasn't going to pretend either. The necklace caught the light again, now unmistakably a symbol of something much larger than itself. The control Jessica usually held like a leash was slipping. She glanced toward the cameras, instinctively checking the optics. Her producers, watching from behind the glass, were already exchanging glances. This wasn't the moment they had anticipated, but it was one that might be even more powerful. Jessica tried to keep the energy light, the air moving, but the room wasn't moving with her anymore. And Denzel? He leaned back in his chair, posture still relaxed, eyes steady. He'd said what needed to be said. He wasn't here to debate faith. He was here to remind people that truth doesn't need permission. And just like that, the dynamic had shifted. Jessica was still smiling, but Denzel had taken the room. Jessica Martin wasn't used to this feeling. She was still smiling, still holding court, but the atmosphere had turned. The usual rhythm, the setup, the jab, the stumble, the clip was gone. Denzel hadn't stumbled, he hadn't even blinked. So she doubled down. She leaned back just enough to appear unfazed, a practiced chuckle slipping past her lips as she gestured casually toward the audience. "Come on," she said. "We're in a different time now." The line sounded rehearsed, like she'd used it before, probably 100 times, but tonight it didn't land with the same punch. She pushed forward anyway. "People want inclusion," she said, letting the word hang there like it was untouchable, not symbols that make them feel judged or excluded. The implication was clear. Faith makes people uncomfortable. Conviction is confrontation. It wasn't said directly, but it didn't have to be. Jessica was doing what she did best, reframing. She was turning the conversation away from Denzel's calm confidence and toward something she could control: optics, narrative. She smiled sweetly, but her words carried an edge now, because in her world, symbolism was suspect, and visible conviction was often read as quiet aggression, especially if it didn't align with the current cultural script. But the audience wasn't quite buying it. They were listening, but not leaning forward like before. Some sat straighter now. Others were still locked onto Denzel, waiting for him to respond again. The room knew what Jessica was doing. So did Denzel. He didn't react, not immediately. He watched her, measured, still calm. And in that calm, Jessica's momentum started to slip through her fingers like sand. She had made it about comfort zones, about modernity, about the world moving on. But the man sitting across from her wasn't playing that game. Denzel didn't come to fit the moment. He came to speak from something deeper. And Jessica? She was starting to realize she'd just turned a quiet necklace into a national conversation, and she was no longer in control of how that conversation would unfold. For a moment, Denzel said nothing, just held Jessica's gaze, steady and unreadable. The audience waited. Phones were still up, still recording, still capturing what had already become something more than just an interview. Then Denzel leaned forward, not aggressively, not performatively, just closer, like he was about to say something not meant to go viral, but meant to go deep. Inclusion, he said, voice low and even, doesn't mean erasing what made you. Jessica blinked. The room shifted again. It wasn't about the necklace anymore. It was about identity, about roots. That cross, Denzel continued, gently tapping the small pendant at his chest. It reminds me to stay grounded, humble, accountable. He paused, not for effect, but for clarity. That's not judgment, he said. That's discipline. A beat of silence. Then the audience clapped. Not the polite kind, the real kind. Like people who had just heard something they'd been waiting to hear, but hadn't known how to say. Jessica's smile faltered. She adjusted in her seat, suddenly less centered, less fluid. She reached for her cards, but didn't look down at them. Her mind was racing, not because she didn't expect pushback, but because she didn't expect it to work. This wasn't the usual power dynamic. This wasn't a celebrity being cornered into walking back his views, trying to appease everyone. This was a man who had spent his life building something steady, a man who hadn't bent to Hollywood, politics, or social trends. Jessica could feel the shift. She glanced to the audience, but they weren't looking at her anymore. Not really. They were looking at him. And Denzel? He didn't lean back. He didn't claim victory. He just folded his hands, looked calm as ever, and waited. Because he knew something that few people on sets like this remember. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. Jessica Martin was good at recovering. She'd turned slip-ups into applause lines more times than she could count. She wasn't rattled easily. But this time, something was different. Denzel wasn't just resisting her narrative. He was rewriting it. So she reached for the one thing that had always worked. Mockery cloaked in charm. She tilted her head and let out a soft, practiced laugh. "So what?" she said, her voice dancing on the edge of sarcasm. "You think the world needs more necklaces and fewer values of progress?" A few people chuckled. A few more didn't. Jessica smiled wider, trying to keep control of the room. But Denzel? He gave her a look. A long, steady, unshaken look. Then, calmly, without raising his voice, without breaking his composure, he spoke. "No." He let the word breathe. "I think the world needs more courage to live your values instead of just tweeting them." The silence cracked open. Then came the sound. Gasps. Not dramatic ones, genuine ones. Then a pause. And then applause. Loud, thunderous, rising. It started from the middle of the audience and spread like fire, hands clapping, people nodding, a few even standing up. Jessica sat frozen for a beat too long. Her smile was still there, but it wasn't real anymore. It was tight, performative, like a mask held in place out of habit, not confidence. Because that line? That wasn't just a clapback. That was a mirror. And everyone watching, live or at home, felt it. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just sat back, calm again, hands resting on his lap. The cross at his chest hadn't moved, but everything else had. The energy, the control, the narrative. Jessica Martin had come to challenge a legend, and now she was realizing she'd just become the backdrop to his moment. The applause still lingered in the air, echoing faintly off the studio walls, like it hadn't quite finished settling. Jessica Martin sat upright, her face composed, but her energy fractured. The laugh lines near her eyes no longer matched her mouth. Her usual rhythm, the polished wit, the controlled tension, was slipping. She cleared her throat, trying to steer the wheel back toward familiar ground. "Well," she began, her voice thinner now, laced with a nervous edge she tried to smooth out. "Some might say wearing that," she nodded toward the necklace, "is a political act." It was a pivot, a reach, the kind of framing that had worked 100 times before. Recast conviction as controversy, reframe values as messaging, turn belief into branding. But Denzel? He didn't even blink. He looked at her, not unkindly but directly, and said, "Only if truth became political." Silence, not stunned this time, stopped. Jessica paused, visibly taken aback. Her fingers gripped her note cards a little tighter. Her eyes flicked toward the floor, just briefly. It was the smallest sign, but in the language of live television, it screamed. Because that response, it didn't give her an angle. It didn't give her outrage. It didn't even give her debate. It gave her clarity. And clarity was the one thing her format couldn't control. She forced a smile, but it no longer carried the gleam of confidence. It was the smile of someone who realized the spotlight had shifted and wasn't coming back. Denzel leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, completely at peace. Jessica searched for the next question, something to pivot again, something safe. But it was too late. The moment had passed, and Denzel had taken it with him. The first clip hit Twitter before the segment even ended. A fan account posted a 10-second video with the caption, "Denzel just dropped truth like a hammer, us Denzel speaks." It exploded in real time. Inside the studio, dozens of phones were already aimed at the stage. Viewers at home scrambled to rewind the live stream, clip the key moment, and repost with captions like, "He didn't flinch, he didn't fold, he just stood his ground." The hashtags came fast. Denzel speaks. Faith is not hate. Necklace moment. Truth over trends. TikTok edits dropped within the hour, dramatic music swelling under Denzel's line, "Only if truth became political." YouTube commentary channels were already dissecting the exchange, freeze-framing Jessica's reaction when the audience roared. Reaction videos, podcast breakdowns, even stitched duets on TikTok where creators pointed at the screen and mouthed his words like scripture. Even the mainstream press couldn't ignore it. The Hollywood Times, Denzel Washington's quiet clapback goes viral. The Atlantic, the power of principled silence. TMZ, Denzel destroys talk show, host over cross necklace. News anchors debated whether it was a faith issue, a freedom issue, or a generational one. But for most people, it wasn't about headlines. It was about something they hadn't seen in a long time. Someone speaking with conviction, not to please, not to provoke, but simply because it was true. And the necklace? It became more than just a symbol. It became the spark. By sunrise the next morning, it was everywhere. Clips of Denzel's quiet defiance played on loop across every platform, from cable news segments to meme-filled Instagram reels. Commentators scrambled to frame the moment, but no one could quite contain it. Conservative outlets hailed it as a triumph. Denzel Washington delivers a masterclass in grace under pressure, one anchor declared on national TV. "This is what integrity looks like," wrote a columnist at the Daily Ledger. Fox News ran the headline, "Faith isn't offensive, it's honest." Liberal media, meanwhile, was in damage control mode. Some tried to downplay the impact, focusing instead on missed opportunities for dialogue. Others shifted the spotlight, reframing the moment as an example of generational values colliding in real time. Jessica Martin's team moved fast. Within hours, they released a carefully worded statement. "At the Jessica Martin Show, we believe in open conversation and the value of diverse perspectives. What aired last night was not a confrontation, but a reflection of the very discussions happening in homes across America. We thank Mr. Washington for sharing his view and contributing to meaningful dialogue. It was professional, polished, completely ineffective, because no one believed it. The comment sections lit up. Translation: you got wrecked. Respectfully, he handed you the whole studio. It wasn't a discussion. He taught a masterclass and left. The internet had already crowned its victor. Jessica's most loyal followers began questioning her tactics. Some fans posted old clips of her past interviews, comparing how differently she handled guests with trending beliefs versus those who quietly stood by their own. The moment was no longer about the necklace. It was about something bigger. Was it still okay to live your values, even when they weren't fashionable? And, more importantly, why did that feel so revolutionary? As the online storm raged, the man at the center of it all said, nothing, no tweet, no follow-up post, no setting the record straight. Denzel Washington just kept moving. He went to a charity event in Atlanta, attended a local church fundraiser in Compton, was spotted walking through a bookstore in Manhattan holding a copy of The Measure of a Man. Cameras caught him, sure. Journalists shouted questions. One finally got close enough a week after the interview outside a quiet cafe in Santa Monica. Mr. Washington, the reporter asked, phone already recording, any thoughts on the interview going viral? People are calling it a cultural reset. Denzel paused, set down his coffee, adjusted the collar of his coat. Then, in that same calm tone that had already shaken the internet, he said, I don't talk to win. He looked the reporter in the eye. I talk to stand. And then he walked off. No drama, no explanation, just presence. The clip went viral instantly. I don't talk to win, I talk to stand was printed on hoodies, quoted in sermons, stitched into TikTok motivational videos. Young men posted it as captions. Mothers shared it beside photos of their sons. Teachers printed it on their classroom walls. Because while pundits argued, Denzel showed what conviction looks like when it doesn't flinch, doesn't pivot, doesn't apologize. He let the world talk. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that stillness is sometimes the loudest statement of all. It didn't take long for the moment to outgrow the interview. The clip of Denzel tapping the cross on his chest, the soft-spoken man holding steady in the face of subtle provocation, became more than a viral flashpoint. It became a symbol, not just of faith, but of unshakable identity. People across the country, young, old, believers and skeptics alike, started sharing their own stories, their own symbols. Not flashy, not performative, just personal. A single mother posted a photo of her wedding ring hanging on a chain around her neck. This kept me going through divorce and double shifts. My version of strength. A high school teacher in Ohio shared his father's old pocket watch. He gave this to me when I said I wanted to quit. Told me, you don't walk away from what matters just because it's hard. I carry it every day. An Army veteran recorded a simple video holding up his dog tags. You don't need to shout to stand firm. Denzel reminded me of that. The hashtag number sign, stand quietly, started to trend, echoing the line that had echoed in living rooms, churches, locker rooms, and back porches across the country. I don't talk to win, I talk to stand. And through it all, Denzel never posted about it, never followed up, never tried to ride the wave. Because he didn't have to. The message was already moving without him. The necklace, just a small gold cross, worn without explanation, had started a movement not because it was loud, but because it was real. Not manufactured, not market-tested, just a man choosing not to hide who he was. And in a culture addicted to controversy and clout, that kind of quiet certainty hit like thunder. No shouting, no spectacle, just truth, firm, clear, unapologetic. By the time the Jessica Martin show aired its next episode, the set felt colder, sharper. Something was missing, and everyone felt it. Because Denzel hadn't argued, he hadn't tried to go viral, he just showed up with a cross around his neck and reminded the world of something it had almost forgotten. Real strength doesn't scream. It stands quietly and never moves. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.